She came back from Vegas with a mysterious tattoo on her thigh. Then I saw the exact same tattoo on our neighbor, who I thought was gay. Turns out, I didn't know much at all. The suitcase hit the floor with that familiar thud that meant she was finally home. I'd been counting down the days since she left for Vegas with her college friends, for days that felt like forever in our quiet house. She looked tanned and tired, her hair still holding traces of that desert wind, and there was something different about her energy. More electric somehow. We hugged in the entryway, and I breathed in her familiar perfume mixed with something new, maybe a different shampoo from the hotel. She was chattering about the shows they saw, the restaurants, how her friend almost lost her purse at a casino. Normal trip stuff. But when she headed upstairs to shower, I noticed she was walking a bit stiffly, favoring her left leg slightly. Later that evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I saw it. A bandage on her upper thigh, partially hidden by her pajama shorts. When I asked about it, she pulled the fabric aside casually and showed me a small tattoo, an infinity symbol with 2 small initials inside the loops. The skin around it was still pink and tender-looking. The girls and I decided to get matching tattoos, she said, smoothing the bandage back over it. You know, to celebrate our friendship in this amazing trip. We've been planning it for months but only decided on the design when we got there. I nodded, though something felt off. She'd never mentioned wanting a tattoo before, and in 15 years of marriage, she'd always been the practical one who questioned big decisions. Getting a permanent marking on her body seemed completely out of character. But Vegas had a way of making people do things they wouldn't normally do, right? I pushed the nagging feeling aside. The next couple of days passed normally. She went back to work. I went back to my routine. She seemed happy but distant, checking her phone more often than usual and smiling at messages in a way that made me curious. When I asked who she was texting, she'd say it was just the girls, still sharing photos from the trip or inside jokes from their adventures. It was Thursday morning when everything changed. I was taking out the trash before heading to work when I saw our neighbor loading gym bags into his car. He lived in the house directly across from us, a guy in his early 30s who'd moved in about 2 years ago. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence, borrowed each other's tools a few times, but we weren't close friends or anything. He was wearing basketball shorts and a tank top, getting ready for what looked like his morning workout routine. As he bent over to arrange something in his trunk, I caught sight of something on his upper thigh that made my blood freeze. There, in the exact same spot as my wife's tattoo, was an identical infinity symbol with the same 2 initials. I stood there holding the garbage bag, staring like an idiot. The morning sun was hitting his leg at just the right angle to make the tattoo clearly visible, and there was no mistaking it. Same size, same placement, same design, same initials. The skin around it had that same pink, freshly healed look. He noticed me staring and straightened up, adjusting his shorts slightly. Morning, he called out with a wave, seemingly oblivious to what I'd just seen. I managed to wave back and mutter something about having a good workout, but my mind was spinning. I went through my entire workday in a fog. Every rational explanation I tried to construct fell apart under scrutiny. Coincidence seemed impossible. What were the odds of 2 people getting identical tattoos in the same week? But the alternative explanation was too devastating to fully process. That evening, I waited until we were alone in the kitchen before bringing it up. I tried to keep my voice casual, like I was just making conversation. Funny thing happened today, I said while she was loading the dishwasher. I saw our neighbor this morning, and he had a tattoo that looked exactly like yours. Same infinity symbol, same initials, same spot. She paused for just a moment, her hand frozen on a dinner plate, but then continued loading and laughed. Really? That's so weird. What are the chances, right? Maybe it's some popular design I didn't know about. Her laugh sounded forced, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. Which neighbor? She asked, still focused intently on the dishes. The guy across the street. You know, the one who's always working out, drives the silver Honda. Oh, him. She shrugged, closing the dishwasher door. I barely know him. That is really strange, though. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was fidgeting with her wedding ring. Later that night, she went to bed early, claiming a headache, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling until sunrise. Update 1. I couldn't sleep for 3 days after that conversation. Every time I looked at her, all I could think about was that tattoo. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. How she always had her phone face down. How she'd started doing laundry more frequently. How she'd come home from work later than usual a few times in recent weeks. I also found myself watching our neighbor's house more closely. His schedule seemed to align oddly with hers sometimes. When she left for work in the morning, I'd sometimes see him leaving shortly after. When she came home late, his car would pull into his driveway around the same time. The breaking point came on Saturday morning. She said she was going grocery shopping and would be back in a couple of hours. I watched from our bedroom window as she pulled out of the driveway, then saw her car turn into our neighbor's driveway instead of heading toward the main road. I felt sick, actually physically nauseated. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at his house, waiting to see if she would come back out. An hour passed, then 2 hours. Her car stayed in his driveway the entire time. When she finally came home around noon, she had a small bag of groceries with her, clearly a cover story purchased as an afterthought. She was humming softly, her cheeks flushed, and she seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. I couldn't bring myself to confront her directly. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started investigating. I checked our phone records online and found dozens of texts and calls between her number and one I didn't recognize, going back almost 8 months. Late-night calls, messages sent during work hours, communication happening almost daily. I reverse-searched the number and found it listed under our neighbor's name. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through months of evidence that my marriage had been a lie. The Vegas trip wasn't a girl's getaway to celebrate friendship. It was a romantic escape where they'd made their affair permanent with matching tattoos. Those initials weren't random. They were their first initials, intertwined in an infinity symbol that represented their supposedly eternal love. I felt like such a fool. All those times I'd thought he was just being friendly when he waved from his yard. All those occasions when she'd seemed distracted or distant, claiming she was just tired from work. The pieces of a puzzle I'd refused to see were finally forming a complete picture. Update 2. I decided I needed more information before making any decisions about what to do next. I couldn't confront her based on assumptions, even though everything seemed obvious now. I needed to know the full scope of what I was dealing with. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of the phone records, photos of both tattoos taken discreetly, notes about their schedules and when their cars were in the same places. It felt like I was building a case, which I guess I was. But the more evidence I gathered, the more complex the situation became. I learned things about our neighbor that completely shattered my assumptions about who he was. I'd always thought he was gay because he lived alone, was always well-dressed, and I'd never seen him with women. Looking back, I realized how stupid and stereotypical that thinking was. Through some careful internet searching and social media digging, I discovered he'd been married to a woman until about 3 years ago. His divorce records were public, and the reason listed was irreconcilable differences, but I found some old social media posts that suggested there had been infidelity involved, apparently on both sides. More disturbing was what I learned about his relationship history. This wasn't his first affair with a married woman. There were photos and posts from a few years back that showed him with a woman who was clearly married to someone else, based on her social media profile. He seemed to have a pattern of pursuing unavailable women. I also discovered that he knew more about our personal life than I'd ever realized. He'd apparently been watching us for months before making his move. I found evidence that he learned my work schedule, knew when I traveled for business, and had been strategically inserting himself into my wife's routine. The grocery store where she always shopped, he'd started shopping there too, around the same times. The coffee shop where she stopped most mornings, he'd become a regular there as well. The gym where she worked out, he'd joined that same gym about 6 months ago. He'd orchestrated their chance meetings with the precision of someone who'd done this before. My wife hadn't sought out an affair. She'd been deliberately targeted and pursued by someone who specialized in breaking up marriages. This realization made me feel slightly less betrayed by her and much more angry at him. She was still responsible for her choices, but understanding that she'd been manipulated by someone with experience in this area added another layer to the situation. The Vegas trip had been his idea, suggested through her. He convinced her to lie about it being a girl's trip and had probably paid for most of it. The matching tattoos weren't a spontaneous romantic gesture. They were his way of marking his territory and ensuring she couldn't easily walk away from what they'd started. I felt like I was dealing with a predator who'd invaded our life and systematically destroyed our marriage for his own entertainment. Final update. The confrontation finally happened, but not the way I'd planned. I'd been preparing for weeks, gathering evidence and trying to decide how to approach the conversation with my wife. I wanted to be calm and rational, to give her a chance to explain before making any permanent decisions about our future. But life doesn't always wait for you to be ready. I came home early from work one day because I'd been feeling sick, probably stress-related, and found them together in our kitchen. Not doing anything dramatic, just sitting at our breakfast table drinking coffee and talking quietly like old friends. But the intimacy between them was obvious. The way they looked at each other, how naturally her hand rested on his arm, the comfortable silence that fell when I walked in. She tried to play it off as a neighborly visit. He'd apparently stopped by to return some tool I'd lent him months ago, and she'd offered him coffee. But the tool was nowhere to be seen. They both looked guilty as hell, and I could see the matching tattoos clearly since they were both wearing shorts. I didn't yell or throw anything or make a scene. I just looked at both of them and said, I know about the tattoos. I know about Vegas. I know about all of it. The relief on her face was almost as shocking as the betrayal itself. She started crying immediately, not the dramatic sobs of someone caught in wrongdoing, but quiet tears that seemed to come from exhaustion rather than guilt. He, on the other hand, looked annoyed rather than ashamed, like I'd interrupted something important and was being unreasonable by objecting to finding them together in my own kitchen. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Instead of denying anything or trying to minimize what had happened, they both seemed eager to explain how their relationship had developed naturally and how much they cared about each other. They talked about their connection like it was something beautiful that I should somehow understand and accept. She told me about feeling lonely in our marriage, about how routine and predictable our life had become, about how he made her feel excited and alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. He talked about how they'd fallen in love gradually and how they'd tried to resist their feelings before finally giving in. They seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset. Like they'd expected me to be hurt initially, but then come around to accepting their relationship as something that was meant to be. The strangest part was when they suggested we could work out some kind of arrangement where she could maintain relationships with both of us. They'd apparently discussed this scenario extensively and had convinced themselves it could work if everyone was mature and open-minded about it. I realized I was dealing with two people who were completely detached from reality. They'd been living in a fantasy world where their affair was a beautiful love story rather than a betrayal that had destroyed a 15-year marriage. I asked him to leave, and surprisingly, he did so without argument. Before walking out, he told my wife he'd wait for her to decide what she wanted to do, like I wasn't even part of the equation. After he left, she and I talked for hours. Not fighting exactly, but trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. She admitted that the affair had been going on for almost a year, that Vegas had been their first trip together, and that she'd been planning to ask me for a divorce but hadn't known how to bring it up. The tattoo wasn't just a symbol of their relationship. It was her way of making a permanent commitment to him before ending things with me. She'd been wearing his mark on her body while sleeping next to me for weeks, and somehow that felt like the ultimate betrayal. She moved out the following weekend. No drama, no big fights, just the quiet end of a marriage that had apparently been over for months without me realizing it. The divorce process was surprisingly straightforward. She didn't ask for much, probably because she felt guilty, and I didn't fight her on anything because I just wanted it finished. We divided our assets, sold the house, and went our separate ways within 6 months. She moved in with him immediately, and they seemed happy together from what I could observe before I relocated to a different part of town. I heard through mutual friends that they'd gotten engaged about a year later, though I have no idea if they actually followed through with marriage. The hardest part wasn't losing her. By the time everything came out, I'd already emotionally detached from our relationship. The hardest part was realizing how blind I'd been to what was happening in my own home. How someone had systematically planned the destruction of my marriage while I was completely oblivious to the threat. I spent a lot of time wondering what I could have done differently, what signs I should have noticed, how I could have been so naive about what was happening around me. But eventually, I realized that some people are just better at deception than others are at detection. Looking back now, I can see that our marriage had real problems that we'd never addressed. We'd grown comfortable and complacent, taking each other for granted in ways that left us vulnerable to outside interference. But having problems doesn't justify betrayal, and being unhappy doesn't excuse dishonesty. The experience taught me that people are capable of living double lives with remarkable skill when they're motivated to do so. My wife had maintained a normal relationship with me for almost a year while building an entirely separate life with someone else. She'd shared our bed, our meals, our daily routines, all while planning her exit strategy. I'm in a better place now, living in a different city with a job I actually enjoy. I've learned to be more observant about people's motivations and more protective of my own boundaries. I date occasionally but haven't found anyone I want to build a life with yet, and that's okay. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to trust someone completely again, or if I'll always be watching for signs of deception. But I'd rather be cautiously optimistic about love than naively vulnerable to betrayal. The infinity tattoo they shared was supposed to represent eternal love, but it ended up being a symbol of temporary infatuation that destroyed 2 marriages and left several people starting over from scratch. Nothing about their story was infinite except maybe the damage they caused to everyone around them.